Hi everybody and welcome to our latest Scottish Autism Facebook Live. I'm really delighted to have with us today Sonny Hallett and Colin Kerr from Amaze, talking about some really important research they've done around counselling support for autistic people. So welcome to Scottish Autism.
Hi.
Hi. Sonny, would you like to just say a little bit about yourself and then I'll invite Colin to do the same, and maybe Sonny, you could also tell us a wee bit about Amaze.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Sonny Hallett. I am a co-founder and former chair of Amaze, which is the Autistic Mutual Aid Society Edinburgh. We're an autistic people's organisation, so we're focused on autistic community building and advocacy and education around autism. And what I'm doing now with Amaze is I'm focused on mental health support for autistic people and also research that's important to the community. So as for myself, I'm autistic, I'm training to be a counsellor, and yeah, that's, and this is Kiffle.
Oh, well, welcome to Colin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, so I'm Colin Kerr. I'm a mental health counsellor. I've been working as a counsellor for, 16 years maybe, something like that. I work largely with adults who have had adverse experiences in childhood. And more recently collaborated with Sonny on the report that we're going to talk a bit about today. I suppose a couple of years ago, I started to wonder about whether I might be autistic, and I certainly self-identify as autistic now. It's been challenging initially, was I, wasn't I? But I think at the moment, I would say I probably am. There's quite a lot of evidence. So that's kind of me.
Great, thanks. Well, this is really interesting stuff. So I guess it'd be helpful to start with, a bit of background. Why were you looking into counselling, and what did you find?
Sorry, say the first bit of your question again, Charlene.
Why were you looking into counselling particularly? Why did you want to examine that area? So
in 2018, with Amaze, I co-authored a report on access barriers for autistic people for mental health care, and you can see that report on the Amaze site. And basically one of the things we found was that not only were autistic people struggling to access mental health support, when they found, when they managed to access it, they were still coming against a lot of barriers. And many of those barriers were within things like counselling. So from there, I kind of felt like it was important that we did a bit more research about what was going on there, like what was actually happening in a counselling environment that was causing a problem, and also what was going well. Because the other part of that was that anecdotally, both for myself and my own counselling experiences, and also for those other autistic people that I was speaking to, we were finding the same kinds of accommodations were helping and the same kind of challenges were coming up. So what I thought was important was that we actually really tried to do a piece of solid research that tried to pull together, something that was more than anecdotal, tried to pull together what was useful and what was challenging and how counselling could be adapted better for autistic people. And Colin and I have worked together in a counselling context. And we also kind of, I would say, sort of discussed a lot in our work what would work for me, and also more generally what would work for autistic people. So that was something that was really important when it came to working together, was that sort of with the research, was that we could draw on that experience as well as draw on sort of our broader experience as well.
Yes, yeah, I think it was quite significant for me as well, because I have done a number of training courses since 2003, and none of the training that I've done talked about autism at all, or neurodiversity more generally. And we were going to do a kind of wider piece of research, asking a number of people and their different types of counselling courses and journeys that they've had, no one had had any kind of formal training around autism at all. So as Sonny said, I was really interested as a counsellor to understand more about the experiences of autistic people in counselling, what worked well, what didn't work, what they would have liked, to inform my own practice, never mind address some of the issues that came up in the original MA's report from 2018.
Sure, so it's really grounded, practical piece of work based on people's experience, which of course is becoming more and more critical, isn't it, that we have that kind of, service-based, lived experience type research rather than something that's kind of more detached. So tell us about the report then. What did you find?
Do you want to go, Colin, or shall I?
So first of all, I have to say, because I imagine some of the people who contributed to the report will be listening. Thank you so much. We got a fantastic response from people. People, they really will, I hope, make a change as a result of the things that we will do from this. But yeah, there was an enormous amount of information. We looked at the themes that came up, and really there were five main themes. One was around the counselling experience itself. How did counselling work? What am I allowed to do in counselling? How do I use it? How do I get the best from it? Then there was what we called the space, which was everything around the sensory challenges of going physically, because we did this report prior to the pandemic necessarily, but certainly the lockdown. So with the physical aspect, feelings in distress came up a lot from nearly all of the respondents. So focusing on some of the things around feelings in distress, working together. How can the counsellor and autistic client work together better? What worked and what didn't work? And then a really interesting thing around autistic knowledge, and it was kind of covered a number of things. What knowledge did the counsellor have, and what impact did that make on the outcome of counselling? And also what sort of knowledge would autistic clients like counsellors to have?
So there's a lot there, isn't there? There's a lot to unpick. I mean, one of the things that struck me, and Sonny, maybe you would want to say something about this, is just that whole conceptual thing about people not actually being clear about what counselling was for, what was allowed, what wasn't allowed.
Yeah.
What did you learn about how counsellors could maybe do better with that sort of issue?
Well, what's most interesting about that, I think, is that actually counselling is a weird thing. It's a really weird experience. It's not, it's a very unique relationship. And to be honest, I think most people who go to counselling could do with understanding better what counselling is. We also interviewed counsellors as part of our research. And one of the things I really thought was interesting was that one of the counsellors talked about how their autistic clients asked the questions that their non-autistic clients didn't think to ask, but they all needed the answers. So it was all about kind of, what is counselling on a very basic level? What are you allowed to do? What are you allowed to ask for? Can I rearrange the room? Do I have to sit next to you? Opposite you? Do I have to stare at you in the eyes? Can we go outside? So many different kind of simple questions that I think, and also sort of what is a counsellor there for? Can I ask them to help me with practical things and advice, which is obviously going to vary depending on the counsellor and the approach and the service. So I think a lot of this is just around kind of, firstly, we're asking counsellors in a way to be much more explicit about what they do. And that means they have to think really carefully about their own rationale and why they do what they do and what their decisions are, rather than just kind of rely on assumptions. And the other part of that is to communicate that clearly with the person coming along to counselling, and also have a bit of a ideally collaborative relationship there. So like one of the things we talk about in the space is this opportunity to co-create the space in a way that gives both sides a sense of agency and empowerment, particularly giving the person coming to counselling a sense of agency, that they feel like they have ownership, so that they feel they can actually really collaborate in this, you know, in this endeavour. And yeah, I mean, I think, you know, our research, there's something about just being very clear and not making any assumptions about what somebody coming to counselling might think counselling is, that is really, really important there.
I think that's really important, obviously, and it happens in other areas as well. I remember trying to support an autistic individual around sleep, and very far into the process, she said to her staff member, I don't know what you're talking about. What is sleep anyway? And you know, we have to go all the way back. But I think the interesting thing you were saying there about the space, Sonny, quite often. In what sort of environments did you find people were counselling in? Because quite often people work privately and it's a space in their own home or an annex to their home. Was that the kind of environments people were working in?
It was a wide range, including, you know, NHS services as well. And yes, the whole aspect of getting to the place, like the waiting area, if there was a waiting area, how that was, and then the room itself. You know, a lot of counselling rooms tend to be very, very bright, which obviously can be challenging.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's something there about, you know, one of the sort of counsellors we interviewed, and also a lot of the people who sort of raised the space in our autistic respondents, sort of mentioned, you know, it was just important. The counsellor didn't understand that there were aspects of the space that were inaccessible to them. And actually, I think that's another really important thing that came out, and something that I'm seeing, you know, as I go into counselling training as well, is it's important for trainee counsellors and also for, you know, qualified counsellors to understand that neurodiversity training and autism training is essential just to understand, you know, a broader idea of how differently people might experience the world and what people might need. And if you don't have that understanding, you sort of miss out on aspects of the space that might be an issue. Because, I mean, that's the other thing really, is that, you know, the individual might be recently diagnosed, or, you know, self-identifying, and there's so much going on when you come into a new space that you might not immediately be able to recognize what it is that's getting in the way, let alone be able to sort of feel okay to say, actually, that window's really bright, or, you know, this room smells bad. Yeah. And I mean, you know, if you imagine going into a new counselling room and your counsellor's covered in perfume, what do you say? You know, you need that explicit invitation to make that okay.
Yeah. And what were some of the adjustments that you found did help people, you know, because generally these things tend to be very simple as long as people have some agency over them. So what were some of the things that made the space more accessible for people? What would be some examples?
Well, I guess things that people mentioned were, you know, a clock that was very loud ticking, so that was removed. And it was quite nice that the person, and there was more than one person that mentioned that, but one person mentioned that the following week when they came, the counsellor had already removed the clock. So that was really quite nice. Bright lights, so, you know, closing curtains or blinds, fluorescent lights, you know, lights that make a noise, having those off. Rearranging the chairs, that was being allowed to take your shoes off, sit on the floor. All of these kind of things were mentioned. And also accommodations like really to help with anxiety, where clients asked about or were allowed to, or would have liked to be able to take knitting in, or the counsellor having fidget toys available, all of these things.
And I think there's two big things that come from this as well. One is that this looking at the space and accessibility as a starting point for the individual to feel empowered to do more. you know, to say more, to ask for more when it comes to other aspects of counselling and other ways of being understood. So it's about kind of explaining, this is my way of seeing the world and this is what I need. And it's also allowing the counsellor to sort of be more open in a way, even if they already think they're open, to be even more open to different ways of experiencing things and different ways that the world can impact us. And the other part of it is that I think there's something really important there about counsellors recognising their own access needs, because we all have access needs. And so I did a little bit of training actually sort of before the report came out around accessibility and counselling. And what was really interesting was that a lot of the counsellors present a few were really quite uncomfortable about the idea of rearranging the chairs. You know, the idea that somebody might sit at 90 degrees to them rather than opposite them made them deeply uncomfortable. And what I would say to that is, if that does make you deeply uncomfortable, you need to own it. You know, it's not the autistic person or it's not the client's fault. It's not the participant's fault. It's, you know, and it's not your fault, but you have to have that negotiation. You have to sort of say, okay, I'm not comfortable with you sitting next to me for my own reasons, but maybe we can do something else. And I think it's that flexibility, that kind of give and take, that understanding that everyone has access needs. It can be just such an empowering experience for somebody coming in.
Mm-hmm. It's that you mentioned it, didn't you? This sort of joint shared problem solving.
Mm.
Yeah.
Not that necessarily these things are a problem, but just that shared kind of way of working through. There's some really nice comments coming through in support of your work. Just take a wee pause to acknowledge some of them, people really welcoming the work, and Nicola mentioning that there's a huge difference between NHS counselling and the counselling that's offered through the third sector around environment and the ability to change things. A less clinical environment makes it easier to ask to adjust things. So that's kind of reinforcing what you're saying there. Might just pause to take this question, because you were talking, Sonny, about training to be a counsellor, and obviously your lived experience is crucial in that. Andrew's asking, what can we do to get more autistic counsellors? I tried to do a COSCA course, but the teaching style of using lots of breakout groups was a barrier because the amount of social interaction, and I had to give up. So there's the step before, isn't there, the actual training? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a lot there. I think, this is not quite what Andrew was asking, but I mean, the first barrier in a way is funding. I think that it would be really useful if there was more support, financial and sort of accommodations for neurodivergent people applying to become counsellors, because it is a very privileged profession. You've got to be able to do it on the side and pour loads of money into it. It's sort of something that I'm lucky to be able to take the time and have a bit of money to do, but it's not easy. I think the other part of it is, I think because there is no neurodiversity training in counselling, a lot of counselling courses, as you'd imagine, don't really know what accommodations are needed for neurodivergent trainees. So there's something there about the give and take as well. There's something there about sort of figuring out accommodations. I do think I'm on a diploma course at the moment where I actually feel like the accommodations there's been a lot of really good discussion around accommodations for all students, and that's not relating to any specific expressed neurodivergence or anything at all. And I think ideally a course needs to be able to have that conversation. Counselling is a difficult course. The fact that there are introduction to counselling courses is a really good way to get a taster, and the COSCA certificate is a great way to get a taster as well. But yeah, actually, for me, I kind of feel like my certificate has been, I kind of sometimes joke about it being the social skills training that I always wanted, but was never going to get through an autism service.
Well, that's interesting. Colin, do you want to add anything to that?
Just a couple of things, I guess. One, I mean, I agree with absolutely everything that Sonny's just said. I think that there is a need to approach organisations like counselling organisations like COSCA to talk about how do you make counselling training more accessible for people who are neurodivergent. I mean, what is interesting is, since I've become more involved really through my own exploration into autism, discovered actually there are quite a lot of autistic counsellors already out there. They may not be advertising themselves as autistic, but they are. Like they're self identifying autistic. So, and I include myself. So it is possible. It is challenging, and it would be better if organisations, like UKCP, BACP, COSCA, looked into the needs of autistic people who want to train and be counsellors.
There's a lovely comment here from Helen, who's saying, thank you, this is really helpful and timely. I have a meeting coming up with a commissioner in my area to discuss how the NHS counselling service is practically inaccessible for autistic neurodivergent people due to the lack of acceptance and awareness. So maybe Helen would like to follow up with you guys. I'm sure you'd be more than happy to help with that. So back to your report. One of the things that you mentioned was that counsellors often have out of date and unhelpful ideas about autism and autistic people. Would you like to say a bit more about that aspect of your findings?
So I'll kick off. I'm sure we both want to say stuff like that. I mean, one of the interesting things was the most negative experiences that people reported was from counsellors who claimed to be autism specialists or to have specialist knowledge about autism. And it seemed to be largely very out of date or stereotyped, or from people who had that knowledge really through children entirely, not from adults. And then interestingly enough, counsellors who had no knowledge of autism, there was a bit of a spectrum of experiences. Those counsellors who were willing to be flexible and open, the experiences were much better. So I'll leave it at that at the moment, because I know Sonny will want to say something about this.
Yeah, what I would add to that, and I think one of the problems with the people who were sort of specialists was that they'd maybe done courses that were not autistic led and were maybe outdated, or were drawing on information that was outdated, and that can do a lot more harm than it can do good. So one thing that I would really emphasize is counsellors looking to get autism training, make sure you get good autism training. And we do have a little guide on our site about how to find or ways to identify good autism training. The other thing I would say about that is I really don't want people to come away with this idea that therefore it's better not to learn anything, because it is really important to learn stuff. And one of the reasons for that is just the amount of educating that autistic clients end up having to do, because the counsellor doesn't know anything. And it's not just about autism, it's about things related to autism as well. It's about gender identity, it's about LGBTQ issues, it's about all kinds of things relating to the autistic experience. So I think there's a real responsibility there to learn, but hold that knowledge really lightly. So learn about what it's like to be autistic, learn about the autistic community, learn about what it means to identify as autistic, that it's not always about getting a diagnosis necessarily, and also that there are many challenges to getting a diagnosis, that some people choose not to, that people have different feelings about it. And go from there, learn about neurodiversity. Those are really important things that you then, it means that you don't put the onus then on your client or the person who comes to counselling to sort of have to do all of that educating for you, especially in the time that they're paying for, or the limited time that they have for, limited appointments.
Yeah, and if there are any counsellors that are watching, reading some autobiographies by autistic people is a really good place to start. You don't have to start on technical stuff. I think that gives you a really good sense of what is it like to be autistic.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, isn't it? It's sort of, it's that perfect blend of having the general kind of knowledge, but being willing to work collaboratively with the individual to say, okay, right, this little bit, but what does that mean for you? Is that even relevant to you? Because so much is so much of it doesn't apply to everybody. Stephen is making a comment here saying, I don't feel the need to label them as autistic counsellors. This is the problem, I feel. What would be your take on that? You know, if you're an autistic person looking for a counsellor, would you actively prefer to know that the counsellor was themselves autistic, or what's the most important information that people need to give out so that autistic people can feel could connect with that person?
I mean, I suppose one of the things that did come through in the survey is quite a number of people wanted to know if counsellors were autistic. And also a lot of people said their experiences with their counsellor was better, and they thought that they probably were autistic, even though they hadn't said they were. They just felt they were kind of similar in many ways. So maybe that's the answer that's come from the survey in that, to that question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, you know, we definitely had a lot of respondents who were looking for autistic counsellors, and we get people writing to Amaze as well, asking, you know, where are the autistic counsellors? And I think a lot of that speaks to just, you know, negative experiences in some ways with people who don't understand about autism, or who just don't get it. And I don't believe that you necessarily need to be autistic to be a good counsellor to autistic people, but and I don't believe that just being autistic necessarily makes you a good counsellor to autistic people. But I think that there's some stuff there. There's just so much there's so much misinformation about autism out there. And one thing I was going to say earlier, you know, along with sort of accommodations, one of the things I think is so important for people to learn is just this idea that there are different ways of being and different ways of connecting. And I think the double empathy problem from Damien Moulton is something I come back to again and again and again, is that we know that there is a difference when it comes to connection between when you go across neurotypes and when you go within neurotypes. And that is, you know, something that's coming out in research. Whatever that means, sort of on a sort of social level, it does have an impact when it comes to the counselling relationship, because it means that, you know, while autistic counsellors need to watch out that they're not assuming there's a connection, non-autistic counsellors need to watch out that the connection might be more hampered, and they might need to reach harder to understand. They need to work harder, because if you assume that you're good at empathy, if you think that you're really good at empathy because you've been brilliant as a counsellor to non-autistic people, you might be terrible at empathy for autistic people. And that can be quite a humbling experience, I imagine. That's something to really work on.
That's a really, really critical point there. Nicola is saying, thank you so much for mentioning the things that are so much more common in autistic people: gender identity, LGBTQ and identity, etc. There was an interesting question here from Andrew. Can you talk about coaching for autistic people as opposed to counselling? I'm thinking about here what is needed in more practical coping strategies. So coaching versus counselling, what's your thoughts on that, guys?
So, okay, I think that it's part of the flexibility that we're suggesting that counsellors should have to do some coaching if required. I mean, I know coaching is a kind of separate expertise. It obviously overlaps with counselling a bit. So, yeah, I think if counselling is needed and it's appropriate, if coaching is necessary, then I would hope that counsellors would be prepared to do some of that, or alternatively, to look for a coach. It might be another option. I imagine that some counsellors, it would just be too alien to them to consider coaching.
Yeah. Sonny, what's your...
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think it clearly depends on the counsellor and the service, but also, I mean, one of the things that Colin and I have been working on is sort of looking at access to counselling as a sort of, you know, as a project for autistic people, in the sense of like working with autistic people to see if counselling is the best option for them in that moment, or whether another service would be more appropriate. And personally, and sort of with other Amaze members as well, a lot of us have had experiences with getting a lot out of support from places like, you know, the AI one-stop shops like Number 6. And I would say that a lot of what they do is sort of support work and coaching even, you know, like not in a formal sense, but, you know, the sort of employment coaching I've had through them, for example, is not something that I would see as primarily as counselling, and maybe not something that I would go to a counsellor for. But there is also a way in which counselling might be more coaching like that can be useful for individuals. I think it just really depends on what the person is needing and looking for.
Yeah, and needing different things at different times. You know, maybe one thing leads to the other, or you know that kind of thing. Cassie, really confirming what you're saying about having difficult and distressing experiences of counselling. So that pans out. There's an interesting question here from Sherry. Apologies, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. How about the counselling approach? Are autistic individuals better suited to cognitive analytical therapy due to many of us having somewhat analytical minds? So the type of counselling, that's an interesting one. Did any of that come up for you?
It is. I think what probably came up in the survey really was it didn't really make much of a difference. It's really down to the individual counsellor. And, you know, some people had really terrible experiences of CBT, and for example, and some people had quite good experiences. People mentioned good experience with Gestalt. But I personally really don't believe it's the approach, it's the individual. You know, counselling is a human-to-human interaction, and it's that that's really important. The other bit, just to pick up specifically about autistic people maybe being more analytical, for example. Again, one of the things that came up in the survey a lot was people struggling with emotions and feelings, and, you know, recognising their own feelings and emotions and what was different between a feeling and some kind of bodily sensation. So actually, I think working and the desire to understand their feelings better. So really, probably quite important to work with a counsellor who understands affect regulation and is prepared to work with people's feelings.
Yeah, and I would add to that, actually, you know, it's something, I think for some people it might be a case of sort of bridging the sort of squishy stuff, you know, the feelings, with the sort of analytical approach, the understanding. And I think, you know, in a way, sort of stuff that is written about autism has really done us a disservice in sometimes, you know, saying, well, particularly the worst stuff about autistic people not having empathy, for example, which is rubbish. But also kind of, I think if we're set up with this expectation that we're going to be bad at emotions, that we don't understand them, or we're never going to understand them, that's not very helpful. One thing that I've seen is that sometimes kind of taking us out of that framework and just going, okay, what are the feelings I'm feeling? You know, what's the felt sense of me? What is the sort of stuff going on in my stomach? What does that mean? Going to the sort of very basic level and not using emotion words at all. Because to be honest, you know, a lot of us have been told what emotions we feel and they're not right. So using our own, I love this, I use this quite a lot, the BBC series Pablo, it's a kid's cartoon series about an autistic kid. He describes feeling scribbly, and it's fantastic the number of times I've sort of shown that to people, autistic people, and they've really identified with that scribbly feeling, because that's representation of something that we feel. And I think that's what we need to work with.
Yeah, really interesting. You might want to say a little bit in response to this, and I will too. Nicola is saying, can you access counselling services without going through your GP? Can we self-refer? Diagnosed as an adult 10 years ago, zero support or interaction with any service. There seems to be no real services for adults in my region. Unfortunately, Nicola, you don't say what that region is, which is fair enough, but I can speak to that a little bit. But first of all, you guys offer counselling through Amaze, is that right, for people in your area?
No, that's not what we do currently. So Amaze does sort of social type things currently every month during the lockdown online. What we're hoping to do is to set up, or what we're aiming to do is to set up some access to counselling, both sort of group and individual kind of sessions. And that's to get people to have an idea both of whether they need counselling, what they need it for, and how to access it, and just to give them a sense of a little bit of what it might feel like. Beyond that, there is hope to sort of get together a group of people who are either autistic counsellors or sort of trained, so that we can be offering a bit more of that. And that's sort of, I hope, on the near horizon. I think it's really critically important that it comes along. We're obviously sort of, currently just sort of putting that together in our own time, basically. So, but that is the aim.
Yeah, that's the aim. And I suppose in specifically the question that Nicola asked, no, you don't have to go through your GP. If you go through your GP, then you would get access to counselling through the NHS. However, that tends to be very time limited. It tends to be CBT. I'm not saying that CBT is intrinsically not a good approach, but 6 sessions or 9 sessions is really not an awful lot of counselling. There are other ways to access counselling for either free or low cost through the voluntary sector. So there are many counselling agencies that offer counselling. Again, it can be short term, and obviously you can pay for it, but paid counselling tends to be very expensive, which is exactly why Sonny and I are looking at trying to set up something to make that more accessible.
It can be expensive. Sorry, Sonny, when you go.
Just quickly, currently as well, of course, because of the lockdown and the pandemic, it's worth remembering that you're no longer limited geographically. So a lot of counsellors are offering counselling, just everywhere. So it's worth looking into that as well, potentially.
Yeah, that's a great point. And if you wanted to check out, we have a new service called Affinity, which offers coaching and counselling and supported decision making, all sorts of things. And the details of that are on our website, and you can self-refer to that. And if we can find out if it's really for you. Go through to the next sort of stage, where that means we'd match you to someone who we think could be the person to support you, and that's all free of charge. So if you feel the need for that kind of service, you can check out our website. I'm just looking to see if there are people speaking again. Leslie Ann talking about the challenge of professionals to not only take time to find out about autistic experiences, but to understand barriers around interoception and alexithymia. So these are quite complicated things that people might not have heard of. What would be would that reflect in your research, that people don't understand things like interoception? And
and also that they're very important as concepts, but they're also sort of more complicated often, I think, than people just looking up the definition. I mean, alexithymia is related to a lot of what we were talking about just now when it comes to sort of identifying emotions, but I think it is also more complicated for autistic people in the context of, there might be something innate going on there, but also, or not, but also I think socially we've not had the opportunities to develop words that work for us. In many cases. And interoception as well, I think, it's not something that many counsellors might necessarily think is a relevant thing to learn about, but it really can be. So I don't know if you want, Colin.
No, I'm happy. I agree with that.
So we're getting loads of comments, really supportive comments, people saying thank you for the information on Pablo. Yes, relationships are key. Thank you for talking about the squidgy stuff. It's been, I've lost it now. Yes, it's been very difficult to identify what's going on internally, butterflies, burning, rush of flames, why that is. Sometimes even the most supposedly simple working out escapes me. And so that identification is massive for me, and without it, no progress can be made. And that, the process is then on hold. So people really are identifying and relating to what you're saying. We're getting towards the end of our session, and we've had some brilliant questions and I think fantastic discussion. Is there anything though you really want to say before we go? Is there something, a big message you want to get out there that you felt you haven't had the chance to say before we sign off. Colin, I'll ask you first. Anything you really want people to know from your work on this report, or just your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, again, I would thank the folks who took part in our survey, back at the beginning of last year, because I mean, interestingly enough, there'd be a number of other surveys came out through the year that kind of supported a lot of the findings that we had. Obviously, it's validated a lot of stuff, I think, for autistic folk, and for us, for Sonny and I, it's really trying to take it forwards, because we've got to do something with it. We now know what we need to do. We need to make that happen, and ideally also to make changes at a higher level as well. So yes, that's probably my observations there.
I would say that, yeah, this is the start of a much bigger project for us and, for others as well. And I think do check out our report summary and we got a webinar, sort of slightly longer thing on there as well, autisticmentalhealth.uk. What I would say additionally is, I know that there are a lot of counsellors out there who might think, have a sort of understandable skepticism towards labelling, and absolutely a sort of legit worry about pathologization. And what I would say to that is understand what being autistic means to autistic people, understand what the community means, understand what some of us mean when we say we're autistic, and also understand neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is, I should also say, no individual is neurodiverse. We can be neurodivergent, but society is healthy for being neurodiverse, just as nature is healthy for being biodiverse. So we really need to understand why neurodiversity is important, why we need to embrace that, and what that means for when we work with each other.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think on that, I think, it's really, really important that we work together in that. So if there's anything we at Scottish Autism can do to work along with Amaze on these things, there's an open door there. Please come and talk to us, because we're learning so much from our Affinity project as well, and there's maybe something we can do together there.
That sounds really interesting, yes. Yeah,
we'd like to talk offline about that, but I think we've had, it's a really important subject close to people's hearts. And thank you so much for doing this really important research. You guys, your last report was mind-blowing as well. You get right to the heart of the matter, and it's such a learning process for people like me who are trying to see things develop in the right way for people in the scope of what I can do. So thank you so much for your really hard and excellent work and for sharing it with us today.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thanks.
You're more than welcome. Thanks to everybody who watched along and engaged on the comments. This will be available on our Facebook page to watch back if people want to get back in touch after it. And we tend to find that we get hundreds, if not thousands, of people who watch it over the course of the next few weeks. So I'm sure you'll get lots of people contacting you guys. So thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your day, folks, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.